The night was colder than usual. A deep, suffocating chill hung in the air, seeping into Grace's bones as she stood in front of her small, dimly lit apartment. The weight of what she had uncovered, the truth about Miles Granger, pressed on her like a stone crushing her chest. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. Everything felt wrong. He was the killer. Miles Granger, the quiet, mysterious officer who had transferred to Cold Hollow from Brooksville, was the killer. But it didn't make sense. He had been right under her nose this whole time. The thought made her stomach turn. He'd always been there, a part of the team, his calm demeanor blending into the background. He'd been so careful, too careful. But now she knew. She had seen the clues, the boots, the way he moved, how he always seemed to be a step ahead. And now, as she stood in the stillness of her apartment, the chilling realization settled over her like a dark shroud. Miles Granger had been living two lives, and one of them was a lie. But the truth was far more terrifying than anything she had imagined. Grace knew she had to act. She couldn't just confront him, not yet. There was still too much she didn't understand. She needed proof, solid evidence that would bind him to the murders. She couldn't let him slip through her fingers. Not after all that had happened. Her eyes scanned the room, the same room where she had sat countless nights, working through case files and reports. But tonight, the papers on her desk felt like an accusation. She walked over to her computer and pulled up the file on Miles, the one she had requested earlier from Brooksville. The sealed case. Her fingers hovered over the mouse, but something held her back. She couldn't shake the image of Miles standing in the darkness of the woods, staring straight at her with those calculating eyes. He knew. Taking a deep breath, Grace opened the file. The file was sparse. There were few details, mostly just blacked-out sections and vague descriptions of his behavior. But she didn't need much. She could see the pattern. He had been investigated for brutality. Allegations that had been sealed to protect him. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how much had been hidden. Miles had a history that had been carefully scrubbed from public view. And now he was here, in Cold Hollow, working with her. She couldn't believe it. How had she been so blind? As Grace sat there, consumed by the weight of it all, she heard the distant wail of a siren. An all-too-familiar sound in Cold Hollow, now a regular reminder of the horror unfolding in their small town. Her mind raced. How many more? She couldn't stay still. She had to confront him. Grabbing her coat, she rushed out of her apartment and into the night. The streets were empty, too empty. Cold Hollow felt deserted, the silence almost suffocating. She moved quickly, heading straight to the station, where she knew Miles would be. The department was quiet when she arrived, its fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Miles' car was parked outside. He was here. Grace hesitated. Was this a mistake? But she couldn't stop now. She had to know. She had to face him. She walked through the front door, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. Her heart pounded as she approached the back office. The door was slightly ajar. Grace pushed it open slowly. Inside, Miles was seated at his desk, his back to her. He didn't turn around when she entered. It was as if he had been waiting for her to figure it out. "Grace," Miles said quietly, his voice calm as always. He didn't even glance at her. "I was wondering when you'd come." The words hit her like a slap. She froze, unable to move. She forced herself to speak. You killed them, didn't you? All of them." Miles turned his chair slowly, his eyes locking onto hers. The faintest smirk played at the corner of his lips. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said, his voice low, almost regretful. "But you wouldn't understand." "I wouldn't understand?" Grace's voice cracked. "You murdered them. Children. Innocent women. For what? What the hell is wrong with you? Miles didn't flinch. He simply stared at her, as if she was a puzzle he hadn't figured out yet. You think you know everything, he said, his voice suddenly cold, almost mocking. But you don't. You don't understand what it's like to be stuck, to be forced into a life that's not your own. You think I'm a monster, but I'm not. I'm just lost. Grace stepped back, her legs unsteady beneath her. Lost? What does that mean? You killed people. Miles chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down Grace's spine. Killing is necessary. It's a release. It's the only way to feel anything anymore. Grace's stomach churned. What about the town? What about the people? What about me? He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and slowly walked toward her, his eyes dark and distant. The room seemed to grow colder with every step he took. Grace's hand instinctively reached for her gun. You think you can stop me? Miles asked, his tone almost curious. It's too late for that. I'm already inside you, inside this town. You won't ever be free of me. Grace's breath quickened as she backed toward the door, her heart racing. She had to get out. She had to leave. She had to warn someone, anyone. But as she turned, she felt a sharp pain in her side. She gasped, looking down to see a small trickle of blood staining her uniform. Miles had stabbed her. She staggered, clutching her side, her vision blurring. Miles? No, she gasped. He watched her, unblinking, his eyes almost pitying. You should have never tried to stop me, Grace. You should have never tried to find the truth. And with that, he stepped back, disappearing into the darkness, leaving her alone, bleeding, broken, and lost. The quiet hum of the police station was deafening in the silence of the night. Only the occasional clatter of keys or the soft click of a mouse interrupted the heavy stillness that had descended upon Cold Hollow. Grace couldn't stop thinking. Her mind replayed the moments she'd spent confronting Miles in his office, the icy calm in his voice, the sickening way he had seemed to revel in her horror. She couldn't let him get away with it. She couldn't let him turn Cold Hollow into his playground. But tonight, everything would change. Tonight, she would expose him. Grace hadn't been able to sleep. She'd spent hours poring over every detail, retracing every crime scene, every piece of evidence. The most damning thing she had found, the thing that made her blood run cold, were the boot prints. Not just any boots, but the kind that only law enforcement wore. Boots that Miles had worn the night they found Jessica Green's body. Boots that had left a clear imprint in the mud near the alley where Lily Hammond's body had been found. Her stomach twisted. He had been there. He had been at every crime scene. Grace had been careful, meticulous. But tonight she was desperate. She had one chance left to stop him, and she was going to take it. Her hands trembled as she typed Miles' name into the search bar. The file she had discovered earlier was now like an itch beneath her skin. She needed to dig deeper. She couldn't wait any longer. The sealed file, the brutality allegations, the cold, systematic way in which Brooksville had covered up his past. Her eyes flicked from the screen to the clock on the wall. It was almost 3 a.m. She had to act now. Miles would be at the station, likely going through the same files, searching for clues to cover his tracks. Grace grabbed her coat, her gun tucked securely at her side. She was ready, but deep down, the fear was gnawing at her. What if she was wrong? What if she had misunderstood everything? But no, there was no doubt now. Miles was the killer. He had to be. The evidence was too overwhelming. The streets were deserted as Grace made her way to the station. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, and the distant sound of thunder rumbled ominously overhead. It was as though the whole town was holding its breath. When she arrived at the station, it was eerily quiet. Too quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their sickly yellow glow casting long shadows across the empty hallway. She could hear her own footsteps echoing, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. She moved quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel her breath quicken, each step making her more anxious. Miles was here. He had to be. The door to the back office was ajar, just slightly, as though waiting for her to push it open. Grace took a deep breath, gripping the door handle. Then, before she could open it, she heard his voice. "Grace!" It was soft, quiet, but it sent a wave of ice through her veins. He knew. He had been expecting her. She froze. How long had he known? How long had he been watching her? "Miles!" she called out, trying to steady her voice, but it trembled in the silence. She stepped inside, the door creaking slightly as she entered. Miles was sitting at his desk, his back to her, his posture stiff and unmoving. The low hum of his computer monitor flickered in the dim light. The only sound in the room was the slow ticking of the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. She felt like a predator walking into a trap. "Miles," she repeated, her voice firmer now. "We need to talk." He didn't turn around. He didn't even flinch. "I know what you've done," she continued, her voice harder now, as the rage bubbled up. "I know about the boot prints. I know about Brooksville. You can't hide anymore." There was a long pause. Grace's heart pounded in her chest as the seconds dragged on. Then, slowly, Miles turned around, his eyes meeting hers. But they weren't the same eyes she had seen before, calm, composed. Now they were cold, calculating, full of something far darker. A hunger. "You've been digging," he said quietly, his voice low and almost pitying. "I warned you not to." Grace swallowed hard. "You killed them. All of them." Miles' lips curled into a slow, almost predatory smile. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said it all. "You know, Grace," he said finally, standing up and walking toward her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "I thought you'd be smarter than this. I thought you'd understand." He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the coldness emanating from him. His scent, something metallic, like blood, filled the air, suffocating her. "What's your plan, Grace?" Miles asked softly. "You're going to stop me? You think that gun of yours is enough?" Grace's hands clenched around the handle of her weapon. She couldn't let him get into her head. She couldn't give him the upper hand. "I'm going to end this," she said, her voice steady despite the panic swirling in her gut. Miles chuckled, a dark, hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "You really think you can stop me? You're not the first to try." He stepped back, his eyes never leaving hers. "But don't worry, you won't be the last." The words hung in the air like a threat. Suddenly there was a sound, a sharp click. Grace froze, her breath caught in her throat. Miles had a gun. He had it out now, aiming it steadily at her. "I told you, Grace, this is the way it has to be. For both of us." The room seemed to grow colder, the air thicker, suffocating. Time slowed as Grace's mind raced. Her fingers tightened on her own gun. Her body tensed, preparing for what was coming next. But before she could make a move, before she could pull the trigger, Miles lowered his gun. "You think this is just about you and me, don't you?" he asked, his voice almost sad now, like he was speaking to a child. "This is bigger than both of us. Cold Hollow. It was always meant to be mine." Grace's heart pounded in her ears, the world spinning around her. Miles stepped back, his gun still at his side. He had let her go. "But that's okay," he said, his lips curling into another slow, menacing smile. "I'll let you think you've won. For now." Grace stood frozen, unable to move, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and terror. He was toying with her. "I'll see you around, Grace," Miles added, his voice laced with amusement. "But remember, I'm always watching." With that, he turned, disappearing into the shadows of the station. Grace stood there, breathless, as the realization sank in. Miles had just let her walk away. But for how long? She knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be long before he came for her again. And this time she wouldn't be so lucky. The night had settled over Cold Hollow like a suffocating blanket. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the world below in a blanket of darkness. The wind howled through the empty streets, rattling windows and stirring the trees in the woods, as if nature itself was trying to warn them. But the town was quiet, too quiet. Sarah had just tucked her daughter into bed. The house smelled faintly of lavender from the candle she had lit, the soft glow of its flame flickering in the living room. Her daughter's sweet, sleepy voice had already drifted off as Sarah kissed her forehead and quietly closed the bedroom door. It was late, far too late for anyone to be at her door. Sarah glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:23 p.m. She was about to sit down when there was a knock. A knock! Sarah's heart skipped a beat. No one came to her house this late. She hesitated, glancing towards the bedroom door where her daughter slept soundly, unaware of the danger lurking just outside. Another knock, this time louder, persistent. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door. She took a deep breath to steady her nerves, glancing through the peephole. Nothing. The porch light flickered. Shadows danced around the edges of the door, making Sarah's heart race faster. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice slightly shaky. No response. She tried to peer out the window beside the door, but all she saw was the dark outline of someone standing just beyond the light's reach. Then a soft chuckle. It wasn't a human sound. It was a low, guttural noise. Her breath hitched in her throat. Something was wrong. With shaking hands, Sarah grabbed the handle of the door, her mind screaming to just bolt it shut, but her body moved before she could stop it. She opened the door, and there he was, a figure in the dark, his face hidden beneath a mask, but his eyes cold, dead eyes. Before she could scream, the figure shoved the door open with brutal force. She stumbled back, crashing into the hallway table, knocking over a vase. The lamp shattered. The air was thick with the sound of her heart thudding in her chest. "Please," Sarah begged, her voice barely a whisper. Her voice was swallowed by the darkness. "What do you want?" The man said nothing. His hands, gloved in black, moved swiftly, pinning Sarah against the wall with terrifying strength. He lifted her off the ground, her feet kicking uselessly as she struggled. Her breath came in sharp, panicked gasps. She clawed at his hands, her fingers scraping against the leather of his gloves. But he was relentless. He was too strong, too fast. The pain in her chest was unbearable as he shoved her to the floor. The air was knocked out of her lungs, leaving her gasping for breath. She tried to scream, but it was muffled by the tightness in her throat. It was too late. The figure loomed over her, his silhouette dark and menacing in the hallway. He raised a hand. A long, gleaming knife gleamed in the dim light. The blade caught the faint light of the broken lamp, its sharpness a cruel promise of what was to come. Sarah's mind raced. Her daughter. She had to get to her daughter. But the figure moved quickly, too quickly. With one swift motion, he grabbed Sarah's arm, twisting it behind her back as she let out a strangled cry. And then the knife came down. It wasn't a clean cut. The blade hacked into her flesh, tearing through skin and muscle in a sickening crunch. The pain was unbearable. She screamed, but the sound was quickly cut off as the blade twisted and pulled. Blood poured from the wound, hot and thick, flooding the floor beneath her. Her vision blurred as her hands pressed against the wound, trying desperately to stop the blood from flowing. But it was too much, too fast. The killer's breath was steady, calm. He seemed unbothered by the violence he had just inflicted. He stepped back, watching her writhe on the floor. Her body spasmed, but the blood kept coming, staining her clothes, the floor, her life draining away. Sarah tried to speak, tried to shout, tried to reach for the phone, but her vision was fading. Her limbs were growing numb. Her heart was slowing. And then, just as she was slipping into the darkness, she heard the door to the bedroom creak open. Her daughter's voice, soft and innocent, called out, "Mom!" The killer's eyes flashed with something, hunger, perhaps, a twisted amusement. His lips curled into a slow smile. But before he could step forward, there was a loud bang, the sound of the door crashing open. Footsteps, heavy and hurried, echoed in the hallway. No! It was Grace. Grace had come. She was too late. The killer froze, a flash of annoyance in his eyes as he turned to face the approaching officer. Grace's gun was raised, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. But her hands weren't steady. She wasn't ready for this. "Get away from her!" Grace shouted, her voice trembling, but firm. The killer didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to care. He just stood there, the blood on his hands slowly dripping onto the floor. Sarah's lifeless body was sprawled on the ground. The knife, still embedded in her side, gleamed in the dim light. Her blood was everywhere. It pooled beneath her, staining the wood floor, a grim testament to the horror that had unfolded in her home. "Don't move," Grace ordered, but the killer only smiled. He turned slowly, as if mocking her. In an instant, the gunfire rang out. 3 shots. Boom, boom, boom. The figure staggered, then fell, crumpling to the floor in a heap of black clothing and cold, empty eyes. Grace stood over him, breathing heavily, her hand shaking as she lowered the weapon. But the room was silent. The only sound now was the soft, strained breath of Sarah's daughter, who was crouched in the corner of the hallway, wide-eyed, terrified. Grace dropped to her knees beside Sarah, her heart breaking as she tried to press her hand to the mother's still warm skin. But it was too late. The blood was everywhere. The room, the hallway, the walls. The killer was dead, but the damage he had done could never be undone. Grace's eyes met the child's. The killer's name was out there, but the true horror was just beginning. The small town, once full of warmth and the simple comforts of rural life, now seemed like a hollow shell. The streets were empty, the store windows dark, the laughter that had once filled the air now an echo in the memories of those who lived here. People had stopped leaving their homes after dark. The woods on the edge of town seemed closer, darker somehow, as if they were closing in. Sarah's death had shaken them all to the core. But it wasn't over. The killer was dead. Sheriff Nolan had fallen, his life snuffed out in the very house he once swore to protect. His smile, twisted with satisfaction, had been the last thing Grace saw before his body crumpled in a heap on the floor. She had fired the shots. She had stopped him, or so she thought. But nothing in Cold Hollow could be fixed so easily. Grace stood at the edge of the woods, looking out into the dark expanse. The trees whispered as the wind stirred their leaves, But it wasn't the wind that made her skin crawl. It was the heavy silence, the absence of life that seemed to pulse around her. Her fingers gripped the gun in her hand tighter, knuckles white. She had kept the weapon close, always within reach, just in case. Just in case. Her thoughts kept drifting back to that night, to the faces of the victims, to the terror in their eyes, the pain, the blood. It haunted her. And then there was the list that had been found in Nolan's pocket. Names, 12 in total. Grace's name was at the bottom. The realization had hit her like a punch to the gut. She had thought she was done. She had thought she was safe. But the truth was, the nightmare wasn't finished. Someone had been pulling the strings all along. And it wasn't just Nolan. The thought made her blood run cold. She turned, her eyes scanning the empty street behind her. There was no one at all. The town had emptied, the people had gone into hiding, but somehow it felt like there was more to it, like something still lingered. She let out a shaky breath, staring at the small house in front of her. She had returned to her own home after the shooting, after the chaos. But something didn't feel right. The door opened behind her. Grace didn't need to look to know who it was. She'd recognized that step anywhere. Miles. He stood there, at the threshold, his shadow stretching long across the porch, his face still hidden beneath the veil of the night. He hadn't spoken since the shooting. He didn't need to. His eyes, those deep, calculating eyes, told her everything. She met his gaze for a moment. His face was the same as it had always been. Cold, detached. But there was something else. Something new that she hadn't noticed before. A quiet, chilling smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I know it's hard," Miles said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not over." Grace stiffened, her pulse quickening. What did he mean by that? She had killed Nolan. She had stopped the madness. It was over. Miles took a step closer, his boots scraping against the dirt, his movements slow, deliberate. "There are things you don't understand yet, Grace. Things that go deeper than just one man." Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes narrowed. She reached for her gun, but before she could, Miles spoke again. "You don't know everything," he repeated, his voice softer now, as if he were telling a secret meant only for her. Grace's heart began to pound. She stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle slowly starting to shift in her mind. Had she misjudged him? Had she missed something? "Miles," she began, but the words faltered on her lips. Her hand tightened around the gun's handle, but it wasn't a threat. It was fear. Miles stepped into the light, his eyes gleaming like shards of glass, cold, unblinking, unfeeling. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the kind of intensity that made her skin crawl. "The game's not over, Grace. You've only just begun to play." His words echoed in the silence. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. He turned, walking back into the darkness without another word. Grace stood frozen, her gun trembling in her hands, her mind racing. The truth was still out there, and she realized with a growing sense of dread that it had always been standing right in front of her. She had only been seeing what she wanted to see. The killer was gone, yes, but there were others pulling strings hidden beneath the badge, beneath the lies. And they weren't finished with Cold Hollow yet. She wasn't safe. None of them were. Grace turned and walked back into the house, her mind swirling with the dark realization that this town, her town, was never going to be the same again. And as she closed the door behind her, she heard the faintest sound, a whisper, barely audible. "The list isn't complete."